I smiled as I watched some of our Living Passages tour group trickle into our base station right at the trailhead of Jabal Maqla in Saudi Arabia, just past the Moses altar. They looked happy but tired. Some had come all the way back down from the summit, others from the plateau of the elders. My eyes scanned the forms of the others coming now in the distance, but no John. My husband John still had not returned, and I was becoming concerned. He should have returned by now. Why wasn't he here yet with some of the others? Dan, Becca, and Chris, who had also gone up to the top, reported into me with an update. The two groups of climbers, the summit group and the plateau group, had connected on the way down the mountain. Some of the climbers, including Chris, Dan, and Becca, decided to go with Eli Shukran, who insisted they followed the camel dung down the mountain. The other half of the group was not so sure. They were tired and did not want to have to go in the direction the rest were going. Eli's group had to climb up first and then down. They didn't want to do any more climbing. Miriam, Kim, Kevin, and some of the others were beginning to tire. All of a sudden, the task of hiking down the mountain became even more treacherous than climbing up. In the meantime, Abdullah, who did not speak much English, radioed into Salim at the base camp that he was taking John to the cave of Elijah. He knew John originally wanted to go, and John was still with him, so he headed off, leading the way. Oblivious to that fact, the rest of the hikers, including Miriam, Kim, and John, headed off following the guide. The only problem was, this time, the guide was taking them off course. Instead of taking this group the easiest way down the mountain, Abdullah was taking him on a strenuous climb to a completely different location. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the mountain, I was confused. Salim told me John was on the way to the cave, but the hikers who returned were reporting the others were becoming overly tired. Just then, Josh came in wearily into sight. When he arrived, he gave us further insight into what was happening. He had finished the descent by himself because he could tell the path that the guide had them on was heading farther from the base camp instead of toward it. Miriam and Kim were struggling with the heat and lack of water, and Keith had taken a bad fall. Josh reported that John had to carry Kim. This didn't sound good. We all gathered together for prayer. Moses, too, did not have such an easy time coming down the mountain after spending 40 days and nights with the Lord at the top of the mountain. He was carrying the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, with the law written on both sides, engraved by the hand of God himself. But this is not what was bothering him. Yahweh had told him he needed to go, get down. Your people, whom you have brought out of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned away from my ways and made a golden calf. They are worshiping it, sacrificing to it, and even giving it the credit for bringing them out of Egypt. From his vantage point at the summit of Jabal Maqla, he could see a commotion near the base of the mountain. What was going on down there? How could this happen? Moses had been busy for 40 days and nights. Yahweh had been giving him the blueprints for the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle. It was to be a portable temple set up in the desert, a place for Yahweh to live with them, to dwell among them. It would be where Yahweh and his bride would live and commune together. But instead, Moses found himself pleading for the life of his people. Yahweh had been so angry he was ready to destroy them all. Had he not interceded for mercy on their behalf, the Lord would not have relented. Of this much he was sure. As Moses descended the mountain near the plateau, the elders, Joshua, waiting faithfully as instructed, cried out to Moses, "There is a noise of war in the camp." But Moses answered, "No, not the shout of victory nor the noise of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing I hear." While Moses had been up with Yahweh, the people came to Aaron in fear. Often when we encounter a fearful situation, we panic and return to the things that we are familiar with, what we've always known. That could have been the case here. They might have said, "What happened to our leader? He's gone. What are we going to do now? Who will help us now?" It could also have been that the mixed multitude in the group, those that were not Israelites, were looking for their chance to worship their own gods once again, or even take over the leadership. Or it could have been an attack of the flesh. The people wanted to party and play. But what was Aaron thinking when they asked him to make them gods to go before them? Did Aaron think Moses was dead? Was he afraid for his own life? Did he simply want to fit in? Aaron told the people to bring their golden earrings to him, and then he fashioned the melted gold with an engraving tool, covering over a wooden carving of a golden bull. Then the people said, "These are your gods, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation saying, "Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord." What did he say? A feast to the cow god Apis? No, a feast to the Lord. It appears that Aaron, who was somehow looking for a way out of his involvement in this, tried to blend Yahweh worship with the worship of the cow god, the way they had done it in Egypt, the way they do it in the world. So the scripture says, "Then they rose early on the next day, offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play." Earlier in the tour, we had visited the proposed site for a golden calf altar. In my mind, this was one of the most intriguing places that we visited. The altar area was a huge pile of uncut stones with petroglyphs of cows and other carvings on the stones, surrounded by a barbed wire fence. We all ducked under a place in the fence and approached the altar. Joel gave us a briefing about the site.
Remember, the covenant that was made here was a betrothal marriage ceremony between God and Israel. In the middle of the ceremony, Moses is up there. They go, "Hey, Aaron, why don't you build us an idol, a golden calf idol?" Now, let me just say this too. You read the accounts, it was not solid gold. They make the idol out of wood and they overlay it with gold. That's why Moses burnt it. You can't burn a solid gold thing. And then he put the stuff in the water. But when you read the biblical account, Moses comes down with Aaron and he says, "What's that sound I hear in the camp?" It's not the sound of victory or defeat. It sounds like they're singing. Why can't Moses see them? Because he's in the bowl. It's not until he gets up over the second ridge that he sees what's going on. And that's when he comes down and he destroys the marriage certificate. The covenant is off. The deal is done. He rips up in the middle of the wedding. They're cheating on him with a cow god, right? And so
take a look at some of these pictures which show the petroglyphs of cows and of men getting nourishment from the cows. These same petroglyphs resemble those of the god Apis, found in Egypt and dated to the time of Moses. Someone from Egypt had been there long ago and carved them on the rocks for a purpose. The location of this site fits well with the biblical narrative, being very close to the base of the mountain. Both Ellie and Joel gave us more details about the drawings, and then we were off. Solomon began to shoo us out of the fenced area, looking over his shoulder all the while. This was the sound of dancing and singing that Joshua had heard from the plateau of the elders. As Moses and Joshua came over the ridge, they could see the commotion. Neither man could believe their eyes. As they entered the camp, Moses saw the calf and the dancing. He was so angry, he threw the precious tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. The people of Israel were having an affair on their honeymoon. Moses acted decisively and quickly. He took the calf, burned it in the fire, ground it to powder, and scattered it on the water, making the children of Israel drink it. Then he took Aaron aside and, questioning his brothers, said, "What did they do to you that you brought such a great sin among them?" Aaron now continuing in fear, sinned again. Don't get mad. You know these people are bent on evil. They thought you were dead. So they gave me their colt. I cast it into the fire, and this calf came out. Moses stood now in the entrance of the camp and said, whoever is on the Lord's side, come to me. The sons of Levi came to him. Now strap on your sword and go through the camp, killing the perpetrators of this uprising. About 3,000 men of Israel died that day. It was a downhill slope, impatience, fear, sin, lying, death. If Jabal Machwa was the real Mount Sinai, one might expect to find a large graveyard close to the base of the mountain and the camp. And indeed, there is one. The entire area is fenced off, but again, there is a way around the edge of the fence. Many of the standing stones marking each grave are still standing, while many of the others now have tipped over. The Saudi archaeologists have confirmed that this is indeed an ancient graveyard. It has not been excavated to this day. Who knows? Maybe there are other treasures there too, hidden beneath the desert sand. Moses, chastising the people for their sin with the golden calf, told the people to consecrate themselves again and went back up the mountain, trip number 5, to ask forgiveness again for the people. Moses pleaded with God to put their sin upon himself, but God said, no, each man who sins is accountable for himself. They will be punished on the day of judgment, each one. God tells Moses to focus now on moving forward, taking the people on to the promised land. Soon after we prayed for the hikers that had not returned, we learned that Abdullah had radioed in and Salam was able to communicate together with Joel to make a new plan. The group descended the backside of the mountain and were driven back to the base camp. Everyone was fine. They had gone through some of the same emotions as the Israelites: exhaustion, anxiety, confusion, misunderstanding, and thirst, just as the Israelites. However, John was actually not carrying Kim, only her backpack. And other than Keith's flesh wound on his forehead, all were safe and accounted for. More than anything, John had wanted to see the cave of Elijah. He was so close. Later, he asked Salam to interpret for him as he spoke to Abdullah. He really wanted to know how close they had come to the cave. 5 minutes, Abdullah said with a grin as he held up 5 fingers. John shook his head. 5 minutes. I have to come back again. We'll do it next time, John smiled. Moses came down the mountain to find a mess at the bottom. The people had gone astray. His dream was shattered. Each of us in our lives have golden calves of our own. We all have things that at times threaten our faith and take God off his throne. Often this takes place when we think no one is looking or our spiritual leader is gone. We become fearful or we experience a spiritual attack. After a huge victory, the enemy always seems to counter with an attack. We too can become vulnerable and unrestrained, just like the Israelites. Watch out. On the heels of a victory, we can experience a great failure. The Israelites were worshiping the cow god, yes, but more than that, they had already broken the commandments, the covenant. They had rejected Yahweh and turned their allegiance back to Egypt, back to the world. They did not want to follow the 10 words, but the evil dictates of their own hearts. They wanted to rewrite the commandments as they saw fit. If we are honest, there's a little bit of idol worship in all of us this side of heaven. After the covenant was given, the first time that Moses descended the mountain, who, by the way, represents Christ, he is a type of Christ in this narrative, parallels the first descent of Jesus Christ to earth. The people's hearts were hard. The law was broken. They were worshiping idols. But there will be a second descent for Moses down the mountain, just like there will be one for Christ too. Don't miss what happens in the conclusion of the book of Exodus. See you in lesson 12.
And the lover of my soul to God, He is Yahweh. The great I
know it sounds silly, but I got to take a minute and say I picked the right shoes. These are absolutely phenomenal for what we're doing here. They just stick to every rock going up here. There's no trail to the Plateau of 70 Elders or Mount Sinai, but these things are kicking butt. Yes, they are.